I introduce them directly to what the learning objectives are, what we want to get out of this, this experience. Then we move directly into a discussion about previous experiences with group work. Part of the reason that I was surprised that I ended up doing this is that my impressions of group work coming into this whole experience were not particularly good, and I think that that's pretty typical, that people have been in situations where they're in a group and they feel like either they're doing everything or they don't really understand what they're supposed to be doing, etc. So this gives them a chance to kind of discuss what they think has been good, what they think has been bad, and where they're coming from coming into this experience. The next thing is that I go through some things from the literature about cooperative group work and active learning in general. So the first activity here is just, it's a nonsense passage. This was taken from a paper by Lujan and DiCarlo called Teaching Without Learning. And the idea here is to get it into their heads that you can teach people something and they can use that knowledge without ever having a conceptual understanding of that knowledge. So I give them like 2 or 3 minutes to study this paragraph, and then they get to take a little test on it. And you can do fairly well on this test, even though the passage is utterly nonsense. Then I show them 2 graphs from other papers. This is from a study done in Korea where you have students solve traditional physics problems with numbers, and they can get the answers, they can solve them correctly, up to as many as 3,000 problems, and then you give them a conceptual test on the same material, and you see that there's no correlation between their score on the conceptual test and the number of traditional problems that they've solved. If you're familiar with the force concept inventory test, a conceptual test that you give to students before you teach them mechanics and then after you teach them mechanics. And the basic idea from this graph here is that you have traditional classes and then you have interactive engagements, basically some form of active learning. And this was at various institutions. And the idea is that we have shown that interactive kind of active learning activities do show measurable gains. The next thing is I explicitly talk a little bit about diversity. This is when I took this this class on diversity in the college classroom. There are actually a lot of things that have kind of gotten interweaved here, but I thought it was worth talking about it explicitly. I think cooperative group work has some real benefits, particularly for diversity, that students get a chance to interact with one another. It's not just one person transmitting the material. You get a chance to address individual differences between the students. Okay, so that was the first part, talking about the education literature. Then the second and third part are kind of more straightforward. The second part, there's this video, which I produced as part of this effective teaching with technology course through Delta. And the idea was that I got from comments on surveys that the participants really wanted more practical experience. The first iteration was pretty theoretical. I just kind of showed them the research on it. So I wanted to give them a chance to see group work in action and kind of reflect on it. So I took this video of, I'll show you like the first minute of it, video of my friends doing group work for the first time, and it ended up being this silly narration that I put over it.
This is Matt. He's a TA for an introductory physics course. Right now, his students are finishing up a quiz. But soon, Matt's going to have them do group work for the very first time.
So that's an idea. If you want to see more of that, I put it up on YouTube. Look for cooperative group work in the field. But the main point of that exercise is to get to this discussion where they share their observations about the video. They get a chance to discuss some of the things that I point out in the video. It's things like the fact that classroom had fixed desks and what problems does that pose. What was the body language of the TA? Did he stand up when he was talking to the students, or did he get down to their level? What were some of the things that the students were doing? Did the group seem to be working effectively? So that really gives you a chance to see this in action and start to consider some of the issues that you're going into. Yes.
Is radio supposed to be an example of bad implementation or good implementation? Or?
It's kind of shown as neutral. I guess in the narration, I do point out some things that I think could have been done better. But the discussion is kind of focused on what do you think went well or didn't go well or different things. Okay, so this is the second part. It was really focused on giving them some kind of practical experience in group work. And then the third portion of this, I realized from comments, again from implementing this workshop, that okay, now we have some level of being able to see this in action. But when I've tried group work, there are really some obstacles that I run into, and how do you deal with kind of the human element of like what do the students do, and if different groups aren't working quite well together, and what are some of the obstacles, and how can you overcome obstacles? And this is really asking TAs to do kind of a social, it's a social task. It's not a content knowledge task, and it's not something that they're necessarily prepared for. So the idea that I had for dealing with this was, let's actually try to simulate group work going on, and let's give them some roles to play. I'll kind of seed some problems into these groups, and they get a chance to think about how could you work with it. So in this role-playing thing, I have these groups that have been doing discussions. Now pretend that they're undergraduates working on a problem. I give them this math problem that's supposed to be difficult enough that they can't solve it in the couple minutes that I give them to talk about it. It becomes very difficult to actually extract them from the problem because they actually want to solve it by the end. So the important thing is really the discussion afterwards. That I want them to think about, how could a TA have helped in this problem that was going on. So, the problems in the groups could be that there's one person that's given the role of being, a dominator and just, take everything. Somebody might be, completely detached from the group and not participate in it, etc. So there are like 3 or 4 different problems that get posed there. And then, so what could a TA have done to help this problem once it's started, and then also, what can you do to try to set up the activity in the first place to try to avoid those sorts of problems? How can you prepare the students to be able to do this? And then the session ends with a survey, same baseline questions, so we're trying to see how the answers change before and after the workshop. An important note here is that on this end survey, they get to say, how do you feel now after the workshop? But I also give them a chance to revise their pre-workshop answer. And the idea there is, what if you said, on the initial survey that you feel very confident about doing group work, and by the end of the session, you feel like maybe you weren't so prepared to do group work, and you really shouldn't have been as confident. So you don't want to have an answer in the pre-workshop survey that says you're really confident about it, and then you have it drop down to something lower without an explanation of what happened. So this gives us an idea to see, did they overestimate or underestimate themselves beforehand. So I'll quickly show you the results that I got from these surveys. Again, there are 3 points in time. There's pre-workshop, post-workshop, and then I also do a follow-up electronically 6 weeks later. I get this extra data point of the revised pre-session answers. I'm doing this on these baseline questions that are tied to the learning goals. And there are also evaluative questions and comments on the surveys, which are useful for developing the workshop. So it's the group that I used for this. The data shown reflects the most recent implementation, which is in spring 2008. There's the engineering school at UW-Madison has its teaching improvement program. So that, a lot of students are required to come there from various STEM fields, but then they get a choice of workshops to participate in. I had 23 participants, mostly grad students. And the biggest problem with this was that on the follow-up survey I only got 6 responses, and I'll talk more about